My own research over the past 15 years has addressed a number of different topics related to the Mekong. These have ranged from studying the critical hydropolitics and also the politics of knowledge, like whose knowledge about the river counts. My research has also looked at the commons, so both local commons, for example, community fisheries, and local practices related to water management, all the way to seeing the Mekong River as a transboundary commons shared between countries. More recently, some of my research has asked more fundamental questions about the very meaning of water. Water means different things to different actors. So states see and manage water in one particular way, local communities understand water in different ways, where water is culturally embedded and sometimes seen as sacred. And another recent area of research that I've engaged in is the question of whether rivers should also have rights. So ideas of ecological justice and recognizing that although rivers are very important to community livelihoods and national development across the region, the ecological value of the river also needs to be acknowledged, like the life of the river itself. The Mekong River is one of the major rivers of the world. It's the 10th longest in the world, for example, and the second most biodiverse. I think within this region, everybody knows the Mekong River. It flows from China down a little through Myanmar and then through Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Over the past couple of decades, the river has changed significantly. Some of the reasons for these changes include the construction of large hydropower dams across the basin. In the lower basin, which refers to Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, there's almost 90 large projects now constructed, and then another 11 projects built upstream in China as well. Some of the other major changes relate to the intensification of agriculture, urbanization, partially fulfilled plans for rapids blasting, and then overarching all of this are questions of the impact of climate change. So in response, there are intergovernmental organizations and civil society networks and academic networks that are engaging in the questions of how water is shared and governed between countries. Some of the most the leading organizations, I guess, are the Mekong River Commission, and then also more recently the Lanchang-Mekong Cooperation. So the role that these institutions play in transboundary water governance has been another important part of my research. So one of the most important topics that has been recently debated in the region is access to water data. So between 2019 and 2021, there were unprecedented low levels of water flow in the Mekong, and that had consequences for community livelihoods as well as for the ecosystems. And big questions were raised about whether these low flows were the consequence of drought and potentially climate change, or whether it also connected to the operation of hydropower projects across the basin. In principle, these sorts of questions should be answerable by looking at the water data. But at that time, water data was not shared fully between states, and especially between China and the downstream countries. So this led to a period of very intense geopolitics, especially between the lower countries and China. And it led to water data being shared all year round from China to the downstream countries, at least for the lowest points of the Mekong in China. So water data has become a very key question, sharing data and using data. But the question I wanted to ask in my research is, well, is that water data improving water governance, and is it improving accountability, especially between state-led decision-making processes and local communities? And is that water data in the end actionable? Can it inform community livelihoods and livelihood decisions to improve well-being? So this led to a research project that I conducted in collaboration with the Oxfam Mekong program. We worked in 2 communities around Tonle Sap Lake, one in Siem Reap province and one in Battambang province in Cambodia. So the Tonle Sap Lake is one of the remarkable water bodies of the Mekong River. In the rainy season, it expands to 10 times its size of the dry season. But over recent years, and especially during this period of low flow from 2019 to 2021, that characteristic of expansion and contraction significantly reduced, which also has implications for fisheries and fishery-based livelihoods. So the project that we undertook, the research, was to try and take a transdisciplinary approach to making water data actionable. So what that means is understanding how fishers in those 2 communities make decisions in relation to fishing and their livelihoods more widely, and how access to water data informs it. So what we've essentially undertook was a design thinking process of understanding the situation and then co-creating solutions to improve access to information that can inform livelihood decisions. Some of the key findings that we found was that in both of these communities, access to water data was important, but especially daily water data, so meteorological data, especially knowing about when storms will come, for example. Whereas longer term seasonal changes in water levels, communities felt that they knew how to live with those changes from year to year based on their local knowledge and past experience. We also found that many community members now use smartphones, but not everyone. So smartphones has opened up access to a lot more information that those particular households have incorporated into the way they make decisions about whether to go fishing, whether to stay for the fishing season, or to migrate for work. And then the other important thing that we found was that many people do migrate away from fishing nowadays. So another important form of access to information is not really about water information, but about finding work, and especially trusted information to access work. So in terms of this, the project, what we then undertook was looking for ways in which access to information could be made better. At present, the way in which water data is being shared is mainly via online platforms in its kind of scientific presentation. So it's not like easily understood or incorporated into everyday lives. So our process was more a bottom-up process of research, or a bottom-up process of how to connect to that information and then act on it. So some of the key findings that we found, or recommendations, were first that although some community households had access to smartphones, not everybody does. So actually very traditional ways of sharing information, such as public announcement systems, are a good way to share information inclusively within the community. So inclusion is also an important theme of this research. A second finding was that those that do access information via smartphones often do so using Facebook rather than more targeted ways of collecting information. So we formulated ways by which the community members could access information more directly, for example, using QR codes to specific websites. And I guess the third finding that we've had was that because many of the platforms are designed in a kind of top-down way, there's a lot of value in actually designing platforms from the bottom up instead. So that means really looking at, first of all, how communities use information, and then designing online platforms and other ways of circulating information, taking that into account, so building from the bottom up rather than the top down. In terms of recommendations, a couple of recommendations could come directly from this research project. The first is about water data sharing itself, and basically recognizing that water data is important to inform community level decisions, but much of the data that's being generated at the moment is designed more for kind of state-led processes of coordinating infrastructure and coordinating across borders at the regional scale. So the first recommendation is that water data should be thought about in a bottom-up way, including in the ways in which it's communicated. Related to this, though, is that water data should also be understood as being local knowledge. And so there should be channels to communicate local experiences of river changes back towards the authorities so that it can be acted upon. Another recommendation is that at present there's an assumption that water data sharing translates into improved water governance. But this really isn't guaranteed. So we really need to shift from a perspective of putting water data into the public domain as improving transparency to talking more about accountability, meaning recognizing that the changes that are happening in the basin, especially those that are caused by large infrastructure, but also by climate change, have direct impacts on many communities across the basin. And there needs to be accountability for the ways in which the river basin has changed due to this large infrastructure. And the large infrastructure should be operated in a way that reduces its impacts. And ideally, even returns the river back to closer to normal flows. A second set of recommendations relates to thinking about the future. So we have now at Chulalongkorn University the UNESCO Chair in Resource Governance and Futures Literacy. So this type of research connects to the agenda of the chair in the sense that we really need to think critically about the future of different environmental systems and people's relationship with them. So one part of that obviously is learning from the past. There's often not much of a discussion about learning from past projects to move forward. So I think that's an important recommendation, to kind of slow down the extent of infrastructure construction across the basin and learn more lessons from the past changes. But then also looking forward to have a more wider ranging discussion about the future of the river basin and peoples within it. So this may include, for example, thinking about different forms of energy system, like raising questions about the impacts of large hydropower dams and what alternatives exist, but also shifting the way in which we think about the river itself, rather than only being a natural resource for development, actually seeing the river as a form of life in itself that in the new ways of thinking about development should exist for its own purposes and well-being. So this is a shift towards thinking about ecological justice and the rights of rivers. So those are two recommendations that I would make coming from this research.